This one, what we'll be going through is comparing the key differences between the espresso, filter, and cupping options. Now, as you may be aware, there's over 5 different packs for each of these following things. And what I honestly do suggest doing is figuring out what your stylistic preference is. All across the world, there's so many different preferences. For example, in Australia, a lot of people like to be at this D12 to somewhere between this A10. If I go somewhere in the US, for example, they can be using B15 or even somewhere up to the C profiles. Honestly, depends where you like to develop your coffees, how much you like to push it, but as well what kind of curve you like to do, because each of these profiles you can down the development or up the development accordingly to how you actually want it to be. If I'm talking about from a world standpoint, majority of them will be sitting between the D12 and D15. Awesome. So if we're looking at these are each of the different profiles. You can see how it's outlined here in a bunch of different colors, and you can see which one has the longest to shortest amount of Maillards. If we're breaking it down with a link, you can see that these ones have the longest amount of time spent in Maillard. These normally correlate over to like a more expressed version in terms of like the sweetness and body, versus these ones have a little bit more roast influence with the development. You can see as well with the first crack times, the first crack time for the A is technically lighter because it's had the most time spent in development, but it has the lowest roast degree, and vice versa with the E has the highest roast degree but the earliest first crack point. This is a very good representation or tool that you can utilize basically to understand a little bit more of their profiles and really understand. The best way that I always tell new people that they're studying on the LINK system is roast each coffee at the same exact development but on different packs. So hypothetically, say we're going to use 13%, we'll do the same profile 209 as an example on A, B, C, D, and E, and we're going to develop them all to 13%. And the best way is to cup those, understand what the differences are and what approach that you really like and what will represent best in that final cup. Now, if we're moving on to filter being a little bit more longer, more time spent in drying, more time spent in Maillard, and somewhere in between in terms of the development. You can do shorter development or higher development. I've broken down the profiles here, and as well as included Martin's, which is that World Brewers Cup one that I helped curate and allow him to really push that coffee in a certain way using the specific brewer and the brew approach that he actually did. Now, what you can see is that the filter A, B, C, D, and E, they're much different here in comparison. The most similar one probably is going to be the C and A. These are probably one of the most commonly filter profiles that I see being used, with the D one being like the longest, but very, very good style expression wise, especially if you're wanting like a washed coffee with a little bit more texture and body within it. Within there, you can see that this D profile has the latest expected first crack, versus the B is a little bit earlier, and then the World Brewers Cup one and the C and A ones having it very, very close by. What a cool thing to note is within the development phase that all of these have a different temperature increase entering into first crack. You can see that the World Brewers Cup one was very strong, and it had a very strong one entering into first crack, being at 5.8. So you can see that the temperature increase is quite high. This allows you to really see if you want to have like that fast and steady rate of rise, and you can have that shorter development kind of approach, anywhere from like 35 all the way up to like 55 seconds, depending on the stylistic experience. Just please note that if you are using these filter profiles, we do highly suggest letting them sit a little bit while, because they will open up a whole lot more, versus the cupping approaches. They're meant to be a little bit shorter, a little bit faster, and have a good representation of the overall coffee. The next one that we'll look at is obviously Espresso. Espresso being the longest out of the bunch outside of if you're doing a custom approach. Now we have A through E when it comes to all of these A through F when it comes to all of these profiles, especially if you're on the new system. You'll always have a trigger if you're using the LINK app, if you want something that's more vibrant, lively, and soft, or something that has a little bit more depth, texture, and weight to it. Basically, how that actually happens is the A, B, and C packs, they have a little bit of a shorter Maillard phase and a little bit of a longer kind of style of development, versus the D, E, and F have a little bit more of that longer Maillard phase, pushing more of those caramelizing and that rich texture. They're actually able to express through espresso. Now for espresso, it's very customizable. I find that people can do it any which way you want. It's more about figuring out what kind of style, recipe-wise, that you're basing it on, and really tailor your roast accordingly. So say, for example, if I'm doing something that's a little bit longer, say I'm doing like 20 grams in and 50 grams out, I'd probably be looking at doing something that's more shorter of the Maillard reaction versus something that's a little bit more of the longer Maillard approach. I'd probably be having it as like a smaller brew ratio, anywhere from 1 to 2 to 1.2.5. If you're going anything above 1 to 2.25, I'd be highly suggesting trying a little bit something on the shorter Maillard phase versus the longer Maillard phase, but don't let these rules be completely standard. Feel free to play with it as much as possible. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask Sean and the team.